I were to try to sum up in a single sentence the current moment, taking in the convergence of these four planets working together and the archetypal energies that they reflect, I would basically say that this is a time in which there are volcanically intense evolutionary pressures for the radical reconfiguration of all life structures. These planets don't work as if in a kind of, through a kind of linear mechanistic causality, as if the planets are making things happen here through electromagnetic radiation or gravity or billiard balls hitting each other in a kind of Newtonian way. It's not like that. It's rather, it seems to reflect something more like a universe that is profoundly integrated, celestial and terrestrial, human and more than human, psyche and cosmos. It's integrated all the way down. And it seems that the movements of the planets have a kind of ongoing orchestrated correlation with the archetypal patterns and movements of human experience. And that relationship seems to be well described in Jung's notion of synchronicity. He himself studied be reflected in external events as well as what's going on in people's interior life. Their dreams, their visions, their emotional states could find reflections in things that could not be readily recognized as having been kind of caused. This notion of how the planets are connected is from Plotinus, Neoplatonic philosopher from the ancient Roman Hellenistic period. He said, "The stars are like letters which inscribe themselves at every moment in the sky. Everything in the world is full of signs. All events are coordinated. All things depend on each other. As has been said, everything breathes together." And Jung said, our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe, and what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche. And one other key principle to keep in mind, this is not a deterministic system, it's not fatalistic, and this has to do with the very nature of archetypes. These energies are very powerful. They're numinous. They shape and inform things, both in the interior psyche and the outer world. Each of these archetypes has a distinctive, complex character, but they have rainbow, iridescent variation of possible manifestations. They are multivalent. They can be enacted in multiple ways. Our agency, our capacity to exert our will and bring in our intelligence and our our insight, and so forth. Our agency plays a role in how these archetypal energies will manifest themselves. It's not like a one-way system. It's a participatory dynamic. And because the archetypes, as you'll see, has this range of potential manifestations from light to shadow, from very life-enhancing to destructive, trivial to profound, because they have all these different ways, that's why astrology, I think properly understood, is not concretely predictive. Rather, it is archetypally predictive. Hi everyone, I'm Rick Tarnas. We're taking a very serious look at what's happening in the heavens to help provide us with a larger context for understanding what we're going through now. And this grave and astonishing moment, it calls out to many of us for getting a deeper understanding, a larger context, a frame of reference that can help us navigate our way. In ancient Babylon, or in Alexandria, or in Rome, or in Benares, or in Renaissance Italy, or medieval Paris, or Shakespearean London, this kind of reflection on and inquiry into basically trying to get a sense for which way the winds are blowing. What's the stance of the astral gods right now with respect to us and our planet? What in God's name is going down right now? Astrologers have known for quite a while that this year's lineup of planets was something very significant. They've had deep concerns, of course, but also hopes, I might add, for good reason in both cases. This is a rare convergence of multiple transits that are very powerful and that could go a number of different ways depending on how we respond to them. We have to keep in mind, as we're looking at what's going on right now, and of course, the world is hyper-focused on the coronavirus pandemic. Even without the pandemic at the top of our minds right now, we were aware of the fact that what's happening in the world is an extremely dramatic situation, which, in a way, all of human history, the entire Earth history is in some ways in the balance. A quality of high drama and kind of geopolitical high dramas. Social justice issues tend to come right to the surface. All sorts of things that have been going on for a long time, such as the vast social inequality that our society is dominated by, riven by, is just being compelled to the surface with kind of extremely potent force right now with the Plutonic impulse right there. The conjunction, the square, the opposition, these are the dynamic aspects. They make the difference they are what shape our character in our personal lives. They are what shape a generation's character. And they are the periods that we look back on in history, which I hope that we all can look back on this period in history as a time when we rose to the occasion. So let me say some of the things about the current Saturn-Pluto conjunction. It began about 2 years ago, but it got much stronger last year and this year. But what is happening now is that the entire collective psyche is being informed by this powerful Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's why we call it a world transit. Everybody is within the embrace, so to speak, of that, or the grip would be a better term for the Saturn-Pluto. Now, the thing about world transits is that they're also going across everybody's individual charts in their own individual way. Each person's getting their own inflection, their own version of these that has a lot. It depends so much on your own life and character. So we each participate in this whole in different ways. And yet, with big world transits like this, we're all immersed in a larger collective gestalt, a zeitgeist that is very much, it's in the air. Everybody knows it, everybody can feel it. There's often a sense of the environment as dangerous, or the world as a dangerous place. Certainly, there's a sense of confronting dire circumstances, or a sense of life being such that one feels the need for erecting protective barriers or boundaries, extreme security precautions, fortifying borders, increased regulations and restrictive laws, even draconian measures. This happens regularly with Saturn-Pluto aspects, for feeling that there's something in the environment that is dangerous, predatory, invasive. Under the very last Saturn-Pluto opposition was from 2001 to 2004. And 9/11 happened right at that, just as it was really coming into tight alignment with all the anti-terrorist measures that got put into place, by which we are still living every time we go to the airport, for example. I'm focusing right now on some of the more challenging elements of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I'm going to unpack. There's a lot of very good things that come with this as well, but I don't want to just jump to that without addressing directly the elephant in the room. Well, the dragon in the room. That feeling of we're in a very dire situation. There can also be a feeling of being trapped or imprisoned, being forced underground, for example. Millions of people are feeling claustrophobically enclosed right now. Illness, aging, mortality, the skeleton and the skull that are the symbol of death. It is the skeleton that allows us to stand up straight, that gives us a backbone, that gives us a capacity to stand for what we believe in. It's both heavy like lead, but it's also grave, the gravitas of moral gravitas, the gravitas and wisdom that comes from experience, the capacity to be able to speak with authority has to come from experience and from suffering and from time, chronos, time, aging. All those are part of the Saturn complex.
All the best memories are hers.
Why? Why to you?
Go meet your daughter.
You okay?
See, Saturn is the principle of limit, of constriction, and setting up boundaries. Saturn is the archetype of the problematic aspect of life, anxiety. Pluto's nature, which is this kind of volcanic energy that is like the overwhelming intensity of the volcano from the depths. It's Pluto, Hades, Dionysus are these great Greek gods that combined carry a lot of the powerful meaning of what we astrologically call Pluto. The elemental energies of life that are both destructive and creative, regenerative. It is very connected to Freud's id, to Nietzsche's will to power and Schopenhauer's will. In the mythic terms, it's like the Hawaiian goddess Pele, certain qualities of the Indian goddess Kali, and also the god Shiva. These gods of basically death and rebirth, destruction and regeneration. All that's Pluto. And Pluto, whatever it touches, tends to drive with tremendous intensity whatever other archetype it interaction with. It tends to tremendously empower and impel to overwhelming proportions that can also become destructive as well as empowering. So when you put these together, we see these are periods of like confronting mortality on a large scale, which, for example, everybody did with 9/11. And in the period after that, in the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, it's still been going on all this time. Both world wars, World War I, 1914, World War II, 1939, began under Saturn-Pluto in hard aspect. Those were especially intense and heavy versions of them, of the Saturn-Pluto cycle. They happened on each side of the discovery of Pluto, which in 1930, and that whole period had this kind of plutonic eruption from the underworld and the great powerful evolutionary forces and the violence that and the nuclear energies that got released and so forth. We've got a lot of that now. Confronting mortality, Saturn-Pluto, confronting mortality on a large scale, the atmosphere of doom, apocalyptic anxieties. It speaks ultimately and more deeply to the global climate change crisis and the vast destruction and kind of apocalyptic atmosphere that has been emerging decade after decade. But really, under these periods, Saturn-Pluto, they tend to come to the fore with great force, and it comes to, and people become much more conscious of it.
There are serious people who have listened to these arguments and reject it, and I understand that. But they do not, I think, adequately address the issue and adequately face what I think is a very real prospect that we are drifting towards another drifting towards the use of nuclear weapons, or maybe even a nuclear war. It seems to me that that prospect has gotten more more likely each year in the last few decades. So it's not just a matter of a terrorist getting a nuclear bomb, although that's probably the number one worry. There's also a possibility today of another nuclear war starting. So the probability that happens is not fully recognized or understood by most people, and the horror of such a result is not fully understood by most people.
Awareness of the need to protect nature against depredation. You see that Saturn-Pluto both ways. Protect against nature, which is in some sense what lockdown is doing. Very Saturn-Pluto word, lockdown. So is the whole area of incarceration, imprisonment. The focus on prisons, incarceration, prison reform is so uppermost right now over these recent years. And then there's the armored personality, there's the buffered self that goes with Saturn-Pluto. The attempt to control nature within and without. Also efforts to kind of resist human exploitation of the environment. Because Saturn has to do with loss or deficits, lack, going down, the depression. Pluto-Saturn periods often bring major recessions or depressions, sometimes psychological, but also economic losses, and also the need to erect structural reforms to control kind of wildly irresponsible financial actors. That's a positive side of the Saturn-Pluto, to regulate the free market. See, freedom isn't always just life-enhancing. Freedom can also be irresponsible and havoc-producing and very narcissistic. And Saturn-Pluto at its best puts in like wise regulation to ameliorate injustice or severe economic hardship. Now, this theme of financial depressions or recessions, we've seen more than the usual amount of this in the last 12 years because Saturn, this is one of the rare times that the Saturn-Pluto hard aspect is also in there with Uranus, which tends to catalyze suddenly and drop the bottom out of the market. So we had the Saturn-Uranus-Pluto T-square between 2008 and 2011. That coincided with the great economic collapse, financial banks, unemployment around the world, etc. That really played a big role in constellating the quality of life after that, and it affected the politics, including the rise of forms of xenophobic populism, authoritarian impulses that get aroused. That Saturn-Uranus-Pluto T-square of the 2008 to 2011 period, that was the only one of T-square of those three planets since 1929 to 33, which was the last time there was a sudden global financial collapse, and that in turn totally shaped the rest of the 30s, which was the last time Uranus and Pluto were square. You had Uranus-Pluto square from 1928 to 37, and then you had the conjunction all through the 60s, which is that more 60s and early 70s energy, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the empowerment of the impulse for freedom and for radical change and the new and so forth. And now we're getting square. So I'm kind of interweaving both the Saturn-Pluto and the Uranus-Pluto. Now it's pretty rare that you get Saturn twice coming into hard aspect during one of these longer 10-15 year Saturn-Uranus-Pluto periods. But this is one of them. We got it at the beginning, 2008 to 11, near the beginning, and we're getting it right at the very end. And we were aware that if we didn't go through the big fundamental structural changes, social, economic, ecological, that were so clearly needed when the various collapses happened. What you get with these cycles is that if you don't respond adequately to what's needed, then the next time, in this case, Saturn comes into hard aspect, and in this case, the conjunction, the climax of the cycle, then the chickens come home to roost. This is when the screws tighten. It's when the reality principle, Saturn, gets driven into our lives with just ruthless intensity by the Plutonic impulse. I want to say a few words about the Saturn-Pluto very positive things that you can do with these energies and that are visible in the people who are born with these aspects and carry it through their lives in noble ways. Often, by the way, there's a feeling of carrying the weight of history on their shoulders and having a great work that they have to do. A capacity for sustained effort and determination, that's something that Saturn-Pluto tends to constellate for people. Capacity for intense focus and discipline to direct your will and mobilize resources and personal energies on behalf of a purpose, of a chosen purpose for sustained periods of time. as in the hard labor of birth, for example. And if you think about, Saturn is labor, Saturn is contraction, and Pluto propels and drives with volcanic, all the elemental energies of nature. That's what a birth labor is about. The mother feels the potency of nature's energies moving through her that are simultaneously propelling in a Plutonic way, but contracting in a Saturn way. And these two together are like basically the aspect of birth, but they also, it's a combination of death contraction, a dying to the old identity, a dying to the womb, and a separation from that past, and a tremendous propulsion through contraction into another mode of being, into a new identity, into a new organism, a birth. Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto, they are the archetypal complex that rules the death rebirth process. I'll just say the three planets I've been talking about, they're very potent historically and psychologically. What is at stake with this tremendous threshold of transformation? That to become oneself in the individuation process, to go through a dying to the old identity and a spiritual, psychological rebirth, it's not just a kind of, well, if you just kind of accept that the little rain has to fall sometimes and then you're going to have nice things like flowers. It's not like that. It's far more grave and titanically demanding, the darkest, most demanding, and even facing not just danger, but facing the shadow, facing evil, and really taking it on and allowing it's an initiatory process. And many of us have for a while been conscious of the fact that we are, as a species, as a planet, as a civilization, we're going through a profound rite of passage, an initiatory transformation. We're in the crucible right now. More and more people are becoming aware of it. It's been going on for a while, but it's just kind of reaching extreme intensity right now. And the drama could hardly be more taut, but it probably is going to get more taut. And there is a profound sense of uncertainty that always accompanies any transformation on that scale of an initiatory rite of passage. You have to have uncertainty about the outcome. You have to feel that everything is on the line, or else it won't have psychological power. It won't produce the profound moral reconfiguration of one's life that facing death does. There's nothing like an encounter with death to reconfigure one's moral values, and you really have to feel that life is on the line for that to happen. And in a way, our civilization today has more of an opportunity to go through this transformation than it ever has before. The powerful movements towards world transformation, social, political, ecological, psychological, etc., that have been so evident over these last 12 to 15 years. Also the hyper-technological advance, etc. In a way, the Rolling Stones, who carry this energy so much with the Street Fighting Man, Give Me Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil, Midnight Rambler, they are carrying in all these different ways, everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet. The time is right for palace revolution. I shout and scream. I kill the king. I rail at all his servants. My name is called disturbance. Clearly, the forces of darkness have got a very strong hand right now. Total self-destruction is unfortunately not out of the question.